Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm really excited today to have Wibbs with me, who I've now known for maybe 3 or 4 months.
About that, I reckon.
Something like that. And he is trying to help people with long COVID through some of their breathing and other issues. So welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Very welcome. Can we start off with a bit of an intro into who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Wibbs, as you've said. I am a nurse by background. I was a coronary care cardiology nurse, and then I moved into accident emergency. I have been nursing, I'm going to say on and off, I'll tell you why on and off in a moment, for the last 13, 14 years now. And in the last 7 years, this is where it comes on and off, I became a yoga teacher. And then that moved into movement and breath work as well. So I ended up stepping away from being a nurse full time to try to help people with a different set of skills rather than just waiting until they got into accident emergency or into the cardio lounge or anything like that. I wanted to try to help people stop getting to that point, or at least prevent them having to maybe go as frequently, or if they do go, then having tools to perhaps cope with whatever it is that comes up better. So, yeah, I basically got fed up. They always say you're shutting the gate when the horse already bolted. And so nursing kind of led me into yoga, which led me into movement, which led me into breathing. Well, the breathing was all part of it in together. But so that's kind of me, really, just a nurse who's trying to help in a slightly different manner, I guess.
And you must find that your background in nursing and your medical knowledge and stuff can help what you do in your classes as well.
It definitely does. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest things I try to bring into everything, and I've kind of tried to do this from day one, and it's been 7+ years doing this now. And the more time I do it, the more I'm able to work out how to bring anatomy and physiology into movement and breathing just in a better manner, I guess, in a more holistic, complete manner. And I've got better at seeing how the stuff I learned in nursing actually has a really strong tie over to everything else. And so hence the fact with something like on COVID, I've been doing breath work with people for anxiety and for sports performance and COPD and that side of lung conditions and whatever else. And then it just got to the stage I was kind of like, well, hang on, like everything I know kind of physiologically wise, really it kind of, everything's the same platter, if you like. And it's just how you decide to look at whatever condition with those same set parameters to look at it through. So yeah, my nursing, I think, being big-headed, it's one of the biggest things about me and my work that sets me apart from everyone else is purely the fact that I always try to look at stuff through my nurse's head, and how can we make you move better to help you be in less pain, or how can we help you breathe better to help you move better to help you be in less pain, or how can we help you breathe better to have less anxiety and less triggers, or for whatever the condition might be. So yeah, the physiology side is pretty key to me.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's something I've been hearing more and more as I've been speaking to more people, either who have had long COVID and recovered, or who are going through it, or who are trying to help treat it, is this link between everything. You've got your physical symptoms, but it's so much more than just that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of bringing it all together, isn't it?
It is. And I think that's one of the things which really, it's so easy, especially with something like long COVID, because it's such a mishmash of symptoms as well. For everyone, it's slightly different, that it's not really like I've got chest pain. We know there's like 3 things or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody's slightly different. So therefore, how someone reacts and responds psychologically to any of that is also going to be different, which is where perhaps some of the work that I try to do with the breathing comes in, is that the psychophysiology side of things is actually such a huge part, because every time you perhaps have a relapse, or every time something goes badly, mind my mouth, every time something maybe goes against you, that you've been feeling really good for a while, and then all of a sudden you have a downturn and everything. And it's how you can hopefully use the breath work and even the movement and stuff within that space to teach yourself to react and respond differently. And I'm sure we all know that when you're feeling bad, if you dive into that feeling, whatever else, you end up with this downward spiral. Essentially, you almost get this like, oh, I can't believe it's happened again. And instead, being able to, for one, feel and understand when something isn't quite as good as it has been. So perhaps you can then learn to back off, or when it is happening, be able to go, okay, I know that through my breath work, I managed to feel some stresses, some whatever else. And actually, I know that it got bad and horrible, and then it got better. And so you can kind of begin to see the peaks and the troughs, and how perhaps there's just this constant slight gradient upwards through the kind of experiences you have of the breath work, I guess.
You mentioned the peaks and troughs. It's very hard to kind of see improvement when all you see is the troughs.
Yes.
But what sometimes you might not notice is that, yes, there are still troughs, but like you say, there is that kind of overall gradually upward gradient.
We're set up to see the negative in everything and to cling on to the negative for safety's sake. So you could have 100 positive comments, but it's always the one negative which is going to hang around with you. And that's what we're kind of evolved to be like. So therefore, it's really easy to keep seeing the depths of the troughs and actually not see that perhaps, there is this upward gradient, and it might be slow and long and whatever else, but there is an upward, because if it was always a downward gradient, you would probably be at a stage where you weren't doing whatever else. For instance, in your own situation, yes, there's some things which you can't be outside doing as much physicality stuff as you perhaps used to, but at the same time, in your long COVID time, you're now doing this on a regular basis, and there's steps which are building you back up, because whatever it is, whether it be physically, like physical, or whether it be mental, all of these things cause us stress. They all cause a burning of energy. Robert Sapolsky, who is a primatologist and probably the most forefront expert on stress, he said that grand chess masters can burn 6,000 calories in a day playing chess. That's not physical, but you're burning a lot of energy, and as I say, it might not be this really obvious upward gradient, but there's this building, this stacking of, I can do some more, even if it is more of an emotional, mental, psychological thing, podcasts, whatever else, you start to build up. And so again, that's all building a tolerance of stress again, and building a burning of energy that hopefully you're still able to find this slow and steady upward gradient, essentially, rather than just being like, well, I'm never getting out of bed. I'm literally doing nothing but going to sleep for 24 hours a day. Do you know what I mean? That would end up being a constant negative trough, whereas actually finding just this up and down wiggly line going in that direction, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you've mentioned breath work a bit. Can you explain to somebody who's maybe never really come across it, like me 4 months ago, what is breath work and how is it so central to yoga practice?
Yeah.
And other things as well, actually, I guess, everything.
So I'm just going to very briefly run over this idea of yoga. So traditionally in yoga, there's this idea of finding liberation, etc., and whatever else, which sounds very hippie and whatever else, but actually you can look at it as just finding the ability to be incredibly present and incredibly non-attached to a lot of things, and just being completely within yourself and finding like this temporary kind of state of bliss is the word that gets used. But to get there, there's these whole steps of how you get there. For what is, want of a better word, the 10 commandments of the yamas and niyamas, and that's kind of like the do's and the don'ts, and so they're kind of morals for life, if you like. Then there's what everyone looks at yoga as, which is the asana, the physical practice, the doing the poses, standing on your head, etc. Followed by that is something called pranayama, which is the breath work. Now, breath work then leads into meditation. So we're always told, especially in Western culture, we need to meditate more. We're all too stressed, etc., etc. And you've got, I don't know, long COVID, or you've got fibromyalgia, or whatever else. Meditation is good for it. Go and meditate. There's these papers which show it's good. Well, that's all very well, but if you can't breathe well, then you're never, ever going to get the most out of the rest of yoga, if you like. And if you look at on the flip side, all the physical side of things, if you breathe horrendously, then you're going to be really inefficient with the way that you fuel your body. And this is really where, for me, the breath work comes into the work that we do with long COVID, and with all of my people who come to me for breath work, is the better you become at breathing. And I'm putting this under breath work because at the end of the day, just learning to breathe is working on your breath. But the better you get at the very foundations of bringing air into your body and moving the air back out of your body, your whole body can then run more efficiently. And so how hard you breathe, how fast you breathe, what you breathe through, which sounds like a funny thing, whether it's your nose or your mouth, all of these bits and pieces are vital to allow your body to fuel itself efficiently. We won't go crazy into too much of it, but I'm sure if any of you have ever done any PE at school at any point, then might know that you had the idea of aerobic and anaerobic. And aerobic means in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic means without oxygen. Our bodies are made up to run on oxygen. If we don't run on oxygen, if we run anaerobically, it's a bit like having a big muscle car. It'll get you there, but it's really inefficient. You've got like 5 miles to the gallon on it. Whereas aerobic is like having a Tesla and you've got like 350 miles to a charge, and it's smooth and clean and just keeps going. And so we want to try to get ourselves to work aerobically with oxygen as often as possible. And that's really, for my practice and for what I teach, this is the basis of all breath work. Is it's trying to get people to understand how the nose works, how the mouth should perhaps sit to allow the throat and the airway to be open as optimally as possible, to allow the air that you breathe in to be slow and soft and quiet, to allow as much air to be drawn into the lungs, down into the alveoli as possible. They're the little sacs at the bottom of your lungs, in case none of you know, they're the little gaseous exchange pods. And that allows for the most opportunity for carbon dioxide. Now, this is the bit which confuses people, or they don't know about. We want to increase levels of carbon dioxide. And so breathing slow and light and gently and fully and deeply down towards our ribs allows there to be an increasing level of carbon dioxide, which allows then oxygen to be released from our hemoglobin, our blood, into tissues. And by tissues, I mean your thigh muscles and your heart, and you're walking and exercising. Yes, we want oxygen into those tissues, but also your brain. Like if you breathe badly, if you hyperventilate, if you overly breathe through your mouth, you're actually preventing oxygen getting into your brain. And then we feel tired, we feel foggy headed, we feel like we can't get up in the morning. And this is where sleep is so important as far as breathing while you sleep. Because if you get a bad night's sleep through mouth breathing and snoring, and obviously you don't snore, Jackie, I'm sure, and whatever else, then you're reducing the amount of oxygen that is available to your brain. So therefore you end up foggy-headed, heavy, you can't wake up in the morning. And so to me, that's the basis of my practice, is to help people understand the physiology of oxygen versus carbon dioxide, the understanding of the nose versus the mouth, and the understanding of light, slow, deep breathing for the most part, especially in the work that we're doing long COVID wise, there's no need for us to be doing hyperventilation or to be doing fast breathing or any of the jazzy stuff that you see Wim Hof or anyone else doing. All of those things have a place and a time for somebody somewhere. But from the work that came out of Mount Sinai Hospital in, I want to say New York, I'm pretty sure it's New York. It's definitely in America anyway. It sounds like it's in in Jerusalem, but in Israel, but it's not. Basically, what they found was like the long COVID people who were coming in, they were mostly shallowly mouth breathing and all into the upper chest, which is very much a sympathetic place. Like a lot of the sympathetic ganglia from the nervous system are much more upper chest based, whereas the vagus nerve, which is kind of that vagabond, that wandering nerve, which goes down through everything, is much lower. And so therefore being able to breathe down into the low ribs is kind of the key really for what we try to do. And then you build out from that depending on what you need to do. But we've done some inspiratory muscle work, trying to get the muscles to, get your back ribs to feel like they move, get your, three-dimensional movement of the ribs. And that's really all comes under the breath work title, which is a very long, meandering answer, I'm afraid. But that's what it is.
Yes. Well, it's not one simple thing, really, is it? I think that's probably the issue.
It's really not, no.
It's interesting. I mean, up until, I think it was about 4 months ago that I started doing stuff with you. And up until then, if someone had said, "Are you breathing properly?" I'd have been like, well, duh.
Yes, I'm alive.
Exactly. Breathing, you just do that, right? And then I think I was speaking to you for about maybe a minute and a half before you said you realise that you're breathing through your mouth. And I said, well, yeah, so. And you obviously then went on to say that I shouldn't be breathing through my mouth, which was a bit of a surprise to me because I'd never really thought about it. And I'm sure if I hadn't thought about it, then an awful lot of other people probably didn't either.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's horrendous. You might find that you do it now as well. But I spend my life people watching. And the weird thing was, if you go back a few decades, or a bit more than a few decades, but the term mouth breather was a bit of an insult because, the idea was you were a bit of a slack-jawed, for want of a better word, village idiot. And I think, I can't remember who I listened to. It might have been Patrick McEwen, but there was this idea of the village idiot going back probably a couple of 100 years, I guess, but, being slack-jawed, being an open mouth breather. And actually, when you look at it and you look at a lot of the research which has come out in the last sort of 15, 20 years around cognitive development in kids and whatever else, and the improvement that happens through nose breathing compared to mouth breathing in those situations, you could see how that happens. And so, unfortunately, due to the constant levels of stress that we now find in modern culture, the fact that we constantly have these things by our sides with us the whole time, and we're constantly watching Lord of the Rings, but action, adventure, all that stuff, it's constantly triggering us to feel as if there is a tiger behind us and then we have to run away. And so our heart's beating faster, and so we're creating this metabolic change, but we're not burning any energy, we're not exercising. So therefore we end up mouth breathing to rid ourselves of this carbon dioxide, which is increasing but has no job to do. And so unfortunately it's come to the stage where now it's just something that happens. I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading the book, but there's a book called Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life by a guy called George Kaplin. It was written 250 years ago. It's kind of hysterically, for want of a better word, sexist and racist, in the term that he was this guy traveling across America, seeing Native Americans when they were still big tribes. And he found that, they were all 6'3", 6'4", big, strong. They all had the most perfect facial features. Amongst all of the tribes, there was a fear of basically opening your mouth. So they would never, ever mouth breathe, ever. And babies would be held, the parents would hold their jaw in place forward and up until that had essentially trained the child to not have an open mouth, because they had a fear, they used to call the Westerners black holes. It just looked like a big black hole. And so it's very Dick Dastardly the way he writes, but it's really, really interesting and this was 250 years ago, and he was writing about the fact that no one's taking into account that we are getting sicker as a society, but no one's twigged that these people who are living in tents outside, as hunter-gatherers essentially, are so fit, so strong. And one of the biggest differences between them is how they respire, basically, how they're breathing. Like I say, my biggest thing is getting people to understand, a bit like yourself, can we keep this shut more and begin to breathe through this? And probably the next thing that most people then say is, well, I can't breathe through my nose because it's all blocked up.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, the first thing when you told me to start nose breathing was that I got this sense of panic. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen into my body, which then sent me panicking, which then made my breathing worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure part of this is going back to when I was first ill and couldn't breathe, and there's a whole load of anxiety and stuff attached to that. But this sense of not being able to breathe.
Yes. And so this is where we come back to the idea of what I said before about oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. So I want to try and keep this as simple as possible so people don't get freaked out and run away and don't listen. But carbon dioxide is seen at the moment as like the main driver for us to panic. So there's a lot of research. There's a guy called Justin Feinstein who's doing a lot of research on this around panic, anxiety, and using carbon dioxide to drive that to happen and giving hits of carbon dioxide, which is then triggering people to have like panic attacks, for want of a better word. But he's also using it as a treatment for people who are struggling with anxiety and panic and stuff. So giving smaller doses and almost getting their body. So you have these receptors throughout your arterial system, through your carotids, in around the brain stem, in around your brain. And they monitor for carbon dioxide levels. And so what you felt when I said, try nose breathing, and you began to feel panicky, if we go back a few moments, I said that when we breathe slower and lighter and deeper, we end up increasing the level of carbon dioxide because we're not breathing out. So therefore, carbon dioxide's creeping up. Your body, because of what happened when you first got COVID, let's say, where you couldn't breathe, so therefore you were breathing whatever way you possibly could, which was mouth breathing, most likely, shallow, fast, because that's what felt accessible to you. But unfortunately, what then happens is you almost trick your body, or you retrain your body to have a lower tolerance of carbon dioxide. So therefore, when you were doing what you were doing, i.e. nose breathing, the carbon dioxide level began to come up, but your body had reset its levels from being, say, 100% down to sort of 50%. So you hit 50 on that carbon dioxide level, and your body went, oh my God, panic, there's too much carbon dioxide, we're going to get too acidic, and if we're too acidic, then we're going to die. And that's where this blood pH comes in. And this is what a lot of the breathwork people try to play around with and whatever else. But essentially, if you're too acidic, you can die. If you're too alkaline, you can die or become very unwell either side. As humans, we have got this tiny, tiny, tiny little gap that we work amazingly in. But to keep it there, your body has this system, this feedback system of carbon dioxide, essentially. And so with you begun to nose breathe nice and slowly. Carbon dioxide creeped up, and your feedback system thought that you were hitting 100% when you were hitting like 30 or something. So therefore, you got this suffocating feeling. You've got this need to want to breathe. You, as you said, you felt like you weren't getting enough oxygen. But if I had been, obviously, COVID, can't be anywhere near you, But if we had been together and I'd put a SATS probe on your finger, like if you're in hospital and you can watch what your oxygen levels are, your oxygen levels would have been, I can almost guarantee, somewhere between 96 and 99%. So you're not short on oxygen. And this is one of the biggest things that people need to begin to understand now. Caveat, obviously, there's a lot of people who have had COVID in the acute stage who do have very low oxygen levels. And I understand that. I've looked after some of them in A&E. And it's a very strange thing to see someone come in with an oxygen level of 65% and still sitting up talking and not being completely doolally. But it does happen. But for the most part, especially people with long COVID who have come through any of that and they're, for want of a better word, better, and that's inverted commas, but you're no longer in that acute stage of phlegmy and immediate infection. If you stick a SATS probe on your finger, you're almost certainly going to have full oxygen levels within your body. What we need to be able to do is get that oxygen from your blood into your tissues. And unfortunately, that means a bit of a fight with overcoming this panic response of carbon dioxide. And so awareness of this is probably the biggest key. And I would honestly say the idea of awareness is so key to everything around breathwork. Like you said, the fact is when you began to nose breathe again, it took you back to that first time you had COVID and you felt like you couldn't breathe. So therefore, there's this vicious cycle of a trigger of it's taking you back to that. And so not only are you feeling a bit suffocating-y, that's a bad English.
Totally a word.
There we go. Yeah, a Scottish, that is. But then all of a sudden, psychologically, you're going back to a place where you don't want to be. And so then there's a panic response of not only the carbon dioxide creeping up, but then you've kind of got a panic response to a situation where you really weren't very happy and comfortable within your body as well. So then you've kind of almost got double the panic happening from a physiological and a psychological point, both of which have a physiological identical response. So they both have this response of quickening heart rate, raising blood pressure, sweaty palms, blood moving away from your guts down into the peripheries. You end up in the, what for want of a better word, is fight and flight freeze response. And that's really the key of getting carbon dioxide slowly and steadily, a little bit of practice every day to creep up and up and up, and essentially improving your tolerance to it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly found once I'd got beyond that initial panic thing that I did notice a huge improvement really fast in terms of the breathing. And now I think, hopefully, other than when I'm sleeping, which is a whole different thing, I basically do nose breathe pretty much the whole time except when I'm speaking, which actually is quite a lot of the time. So you set up these classes and found some people.
I did, yeah. Still looking for more if you want to come and join.
And I've found it's quite nice to have a group of people who get it as well. I mean, you have all the support groups, but they're so big that, they're really useful and they're great for so many people. And if you've come up with a new symptom, you search it in the support group and you find that 300 people have already had it. So you think, right, okay, that's one thing I don't need to worry about. But in terms of that actual sort of individual thing, it's been really nice to have a sort of a smaller group, which has been nice. So talk a little bit about what you've been working through in the class.
Yeah, so I wanted to try to bring some of these basics of let's shut our mouth and breathe through our nose. Let's try to get people to understand why we do that and how we do that and what purpose of all that is. And then like we've been talking about, this idea of carbon dioxide tolerance and trying to build this tolerance up a little bit. These are all the things I wanted to try and get across into the class and across to people. I guess I should probably just say I kind of felt like I really wanted to do this because not that I'm saying there aren't support groups or anything along those lines at all, because there is plenty, I'm sure. But at the same time, from my perspective of physiologically looking at things, going back to where we started as a nurse, I felt like there was just a real lack of, I'm not saying this is a fix, but there is definite physiological changes which have happened due to COVID. And you're probably not aware of how they changed. And so actually, can I help people to change some of the physiology within themselves, which then will drive the psychology? And so we kind of talked a little while earlier about this idea of psychology and physiology both being interlinked. And there's a mental health charity called Physiology First, which I really like that name, because essentially all of the stuff which comes in your brain. So, for long COVID, it's those days when you just feel drained and you negative thoughts are kind of running, trying to remember that physiology is driving those thoughts. And so, there is like an embodied approach to this. And there is this thing of like, it's not solely just a physiological, but if we can get the physiological response to be maybe not even under control, that might be a bit too strong, but have a full awareness of it and understand that perhaps these things I'm feeling on my worst days, they're just energy being moved. And it's maybe being moved in not the most efficient manner. And it's maybe not moving to where we really need it at this moment. And so taking that idea of like, can we begin to get people to understand that all of the psychological stuff will be driven by physiology. All of the physiological stuff has two sides to it. One is biomechanics, so how well your body can move to allow breath in. And also once the breath has got in, how well your body moves to expel air as well. So that's the kind of biomechanics, for want of a better word, trying to get ribs to move, trying to get lung capacity to improve. There was, don't ask me the name of who it is, papers which basically show that one of the biggest correspondence with longer life or shorter morbidity was lung capacity. And so pretty much everyone who had a bigger lung capacity ended up living longer, healthier lives than those who didn't. We tend to have an average lung capacity of 5 to 6 litres. The world record is about 14 litres, which is ridiculous, like twice the size. He's a free diver, so don't try and get to those levels. But the work we're doing within the class is how can we improve lung capacity? How can we improve CO2 tolerance? How can we begin to understand how we can perhaps harness something called nitric oxide, which is made within our sinuses, which allows us to open up airways better, which then, as you said, found it really difficult to breathe to begin with. If you're a stuffy-nosed person and you kind of can't breathe through your nose because you constantly feel as if you've got a blocked nose, we use tips and tools and exercises to help unblock our nose, to begin to understand how a simple breath hold and a little head nod or head shake can unblock the nose, which can then allow other breathing exercises to take place. Or it might just mean that you can then go out. We had this conversation on Wednesday, actually. You can actually then go out, do what you want to do, walk, cycle, go to the shops, whatever it might be, while still nose breathing. And just briefly on this, why do we want to nose breathe? We didn't really bring this up earlier. Like, what are the benefits of nose breathing? Your nose warms, humidifies, cleans, helps to produce this nitric oxide, this little gas, which is a molecule within there. There's about 20 different jobs that your nose does when you breathe through it. So if you're not breathing through your nose, you're not warming the air in the same way that if you go and put your hand in a bucket of cold water, all of the blood disappears in your hand. It goes pale and all the blood vessels constrict. Same thing happens within your lungs. If you're mouth breathing, you can even just do it while you're sitting listening to this. If you take a breath in, it feels cold in your throat and in your chest, and your body is then going to constrict away from that cold air. If you breathe through your nose, it's cold on the inside of your nose, but then you don't feel the breath through the back of the throat into your lungs because it's been warmed as it gets drawn through. There's antimicrobial, like antibacterial, antiviral properties to the nitric oxide that you breathe and to the mucus within your nose. So therefore, you're preventing a lot of bacteria, a lot of viral load actually making its way into your lungs. Patrick talked about this on my podcast with him. We'll go into who Patrick is in a bit, I guess, but he talked about this, and I can't remember what they call it, but essentially, and I had read about it before, there's a nose spray that they're trying to develop, which is basically nitric oxide. And nitric oxide has a really strong antiviral property. They've found that in Petri dishes, it has a really strong effect of killing SARS-CoV. So they're trying to develop that. You can use that to prevent you taking the COVID virus into your lungs, essentially. But you can do that by nose breathing. This is the frustrating thing. If we just go back to basics and begin to understand our physiology and our anatomy, like we do in class. We spend time, and quite often our classes aren't complicated. We're not doing crazy different things every week, but we're spending time building a habit of nose breathing, of maybe doing some breath holds to increase carbon dioxide tolerance, maybe doing breath holds and head shakes to unblock our nose bit. We try to do like monthly segments, so we do 4 or 5 weeks of this exercise. We got the band and we strapped it around our ribs, and then we try to breathe in towards our ribs to try to press away into something, to have an awareness, a sensory feedback of where am I actually breathing into? Am I actually able to get any air? Am I able to move my intercostals? They're the muscles between your ribs, my obliques, some of the abdominal muscles. Can I get my diaphragm to be more efficient at moving? Those are basically the things that we look at in the class.
That whole idea of breathing into different places is certainly not something I'd ever thought about. You breathe in your lungs, don't you? But there's so many different parts of your lungs and different muscles that are involved, far more than I had any idea of.
And also, just like not necessarily long COVID, back pain is one of the biggest thing that puts people off work these days. If you can just learn to move your diaphragm better, which is practice doing like what we did, put a strap around your chest, try to breathe into your back, getting your diaphragm to move, allow your ribs to move, which will allow more of your spine to move, which will allow your pelvis to move. Quite often, just doing some simple breath work, especially if you have got long COVID or COVID and you've spent the last 18 months, 2 years sitting at a computer, you're probably not moving as much as you ever used to. So doing some simple breath work can allow more movement into your body in a non-stressful, non-exhausting manner.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. I don't know if it's a measure of improvement, the CO2 test, but it's certainly something that you can use, isn't it?
Definitely. So there's 2 different variations of these tests, depending on what school of thought you come through. There's the Buteyko method, which is Patrick McEwen. I can send you his details so you can just put them in, because he's definitely worth checking out. So there's that, which is what's called the BOLT score, body oxygenation level test. And then there's also the CO2 tolerance test. So they're basically measuring the same thing. But one, personally, I find can be a bit more objective than subjective. So quite often people prefer the BOLT score because it's a little bit less stressful. And the idea of this BOLT score is that you can probably all do this just while we sit, but essentially you sit and relax for 3 or 4 breaths, breathing through your nose. And on the 4th breath, you would take a breath in, just a normal inhale in, a normal exhale out. You'd pinch your nose, hold your breath, and you'd start a stopwatch, and you just relax as much as you can until you get the first urge to breathe. And by first urge to breathe, that's not how long can I hold my breath for. This is really important. It's not I'm going to hold my breath forever. It's when do I get the first urge to breathe? And that might be a swallow. That might be a little diaphragmatic kick. It might just be, holy molasses, I need to breathe. Any of those feelings, you just release, you press stop. And if you end up doing this, that's a pretty good sign that you did not go on the first urge to breathe. You held it longer. You should be able to breathe in softly, quietly, deeply, subtly. Everything that you were doing beforehand, you should be able to breathe in exactly the same way. If you can't, you held it too long. Between this and then the CO2 tolerance test, which works in a different manner, essentially you relax again, 3 to 5 breaths, then you take a deep inhale and as much air into your lungs as you possibly can. And from the top of the breath, you hit start, and then you exhale through your nose as slowly and quietly and softly as possible until there's nothing left, or until again you swallow, you get this stop-starty thing, anything like that, you stop the clock. And both these tests are basically watching for how much carbon dioxide is building within your body before you panic in some way, physiologically panic. So this then gives us a base to then work from, because then we can do CO2 tolerance work. Then we can do any of the work that we've talked about that we've done in class, all of which is trying to get us to build a greater CO2 tolerance, that when you go back and 2 days later, 3 days later, a month later, and you carry on doing these bolt scores, you can suddenly begin to see that. When I started, what was yours when you started? Can you remember?
I think my bolt score was like 6.
Yeah, it's about 6 seconds before you got the thing. But then I think 2 weeks ago, you were up into 24 seconds or something.
24, 25, something like that, which I think is on the low side, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was.
It's a hell of a lot better. But we, on the bolt score, we're wanting to aim for 25 seconds plus. That's when we're starting to get to more functional breathing. Similar thing with CO2, except the numbers are going to be a bit different. But essentially, you're trying to get over 45, 50 seconds. And again, that gives us an idea of what our tolerance to these stresses are. And if you think that you're getting triggered that early through just carbon dioxide, when you suddenly put external stress on you from the world of, I've got deadlines, I need to get out, I've got to walk the dogs, I've got 3 kids that need to go to school, and I've still got long COVID, and I've still got this, you can see how very quickly you're going to flip your lid and trigger into a place of mouth breathing again, which is just going to drive your CO2 tolerance lower, which then means next time it's going to happen sooner. And so we want to be able to be aware of that and actually spend time just observing ourselves breathing, going back to where you were, almost thinking about those horrible moments when you had before, but being able to breathe through it nicely. And so therefore you can use that bolt CO2 score to go, well, when I started, I had 4 seconds. And I'm not saying that suddenly getting to 25 or 30 seconds on your bolt score means that you are fixed and you're healed and you're suddenly better. But what it means is at least the majority of the time you're beginning to work aerobically, you're beginning to breathe more functionally. More of your tissues are going to be being oxygenated more efficiently, more effectively, more of the time, all of which means you're not burning excess energy on stuff that you don't need to be doing, which should then mean you've got more energy for more things psychologically as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that sort of slowing it down to help anxiety as well. I've definitely noticed that's helped me.
It is, yes, and that's kind of the main thing. But the biggest thing is people then look to use a breath technique in the moment to help them relax. I'm not saying it won't work, because it will to a certain degree, but it's probably not going to be the golden elixir. It's not going to be the panacea for everything. But if you can spend time practicing and being aware of what your bodily responses are when you're going to be beginning to feel more anxious, what it's going to allow you to do is catch yourself being anxious, to allow yourself to catch yourself being panicked earlier and earlier, so that any tools that you've got, you can observe it and go, right, I know that I'm starting to feel something, which normally I would never have seen it before. I would have blown my lid and I'd be like, what the hell happened? Why am I suddenly seeing this full-blown anxiety attack? But you can see it early, you can spot it early, you can then put the tools into place of, I need to get out of this situation, I need to find somewhere quiet to be, and I need somewhere to sit and breathe, and I need to, whatever the tools are that work for you, whether it's driven through long COVID or whether it's driven through work or whatever else. You long COVID guys, you're on the back foot slightly because you've had this thing which has just pushed all of your physiological receptors to almost be reset to a place that you've just got to build up from. And knowing that, you've just got to be like, right, I know when I'm triggered, I'm just being triggered a little bit earlier because of this stuff, and it's fine. And every day is going to be different. Every day it's going to be a bit better or a bit worse. And when it's better, maybe celebrate it, but maybe don't. Just be like, cool, it's better today. And when it's worse, don't commiserate, don't get annoyed. Just be like, okay, today's worse, but yesterday was better than they've ever had before. So who knows what tomorrow is going to bring? And so you end up with this trying to find a plateau through the middle of the peaks and the troughs psychologically, which should then allow, if you can keep avoiding the troughs, it's less energy exerted for the sake of just feeling pissed off.
I mean, you say it's not a cure, is it? But if you can help something, then that'll help other things too, indirectly.
I'm not an expert on long COVID. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on breathing or moving or anything personally, but no one is at the moment. And actually what we do know is there's things that we can do to help us in certain ways. And physiologically, psychologically, there is a growing body of papers which, for a whole bunch of conditions, breath work can be a really strong foundation to build up of. And unless we have a foundation, we're building our house on sand. Nothing's going to work.
Yeah, it's not a great idea.
No, it's not. So if you've never heard of him, I'd recommend checking out a guy called Andrew Huberman as well. He's a neuroscientist, works at Stanford, I think. He's got an amazing podcast, which is mind-blowingly scientific. He's very, very lay person. He breaks down amazing, but what he puts into it and the tools he puts in are amazing. And so, as you know, on a Thursday night, I teach yin yoga and yoga nidra. And Andrew Huberman talks a lot about what he calls non-sleep deep rest protocols, NSDRs. And the idea being is trying to give the body a chance to downshift, downregulate, using guided meditations, basically. Like I said, on Thursday night, we do yin yoga, which is very still, very static. You hold poses for 2 to 5 minutes. And so quite often people, long code from what I've heard, people want to do more, but they feel like they can't because it's exhausting and whatever else. But whether through me, whether through anyone, whether through YouTube, there's a million yin yoga videos. Something like yin yoga, something like yoga nidra can be hugely beneficial to give you an hour or 45 minutes or an hour and a half, whatever, to shift your nervous system from fight and flight, like we talked about, where heart's racing, we're shallow breathing through the upper chest. And instead you downshift and you relax and you shift from fight and flight and freeze into rest, digest, reproduce. We go into this place in which the whole nervous system settles, the blood pressure, the heart rate, everything comes down. And it allows our whole body to shift blood away from the extremities back in towards our gut, back in towards our chest, allows for food to be digested more fully, etc., getting more nutrients. If you are at a place fed up and bored and just you haven't moved for ages, like it might not seem like you're doing a huge amount, but something like a practice of yin yoga, the biggest thing I would ever suggest is that never listen to the teacher, just listen to your own body. If you feel like I can't do that in a real class, ask them and say, what can I do instead? Because I don't want to do that. And if they make you feel bad, don't go to their class ever again. But something like a practice of yin yoga or really gentle hatha yoga, really kind of gentle flow, can allow you to get blood moving, get lymph moving. And that's a really important side of things as well, allowing movement to move fluid within your body. Lymph is like a waste product within the body. And if it sits stagnant, it's like having a blocked toilet in your body. It's never going to end well. But moving is how we move this lymph around and we expel it from the body. So finding some style of moving, a yin yoga would be a really nice place. Yoga nidra before you go to bed can probably really help you downshift, downregulate, and find a place in which you can fall asleep easier and hopefully stay asleep is the key, because quite often people can fall asleep but they can't stay asleep.
Yeah, that idea of moving but without it being exercise, because exercise I think in a lot of people certainly isn't a good idea, but movement is not really the same thing, is it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that's one of my bugbears these days, but like understanding the difference between movement and exercise, and not doing something because you feel like you need to exercise, but doing something because you need to move. So even if it's just going for like a walk. Walking is one of the best things like anyone can do for most situations. For relaxing, walking is amazing. Getting outside, seeing the entire horizon has a calming effect on the nervous system. Like I say, a simple, gentle flow can just allow you to move parts of your body without getting a sweat on, without getting your heart rate up. And if you can do it nose breathing the whole time, again, then you're going to be moving fluid around. You're also going to be being efficient and effective with your aerobic work. So therefore you get to combine the two elements.
And I guess listen to your body. If you're feeling too tired to do it, then don't do it. If it hurts, don't do it.
Listen to your body. Certainly this is how I feel. Like if you're on Zoom and you're doing an online yoga class or something, like if you're too tired, just hang up. Don't just work your way through it. Either that or just take child's pose. I literally have taken in-person classes where 20 minutes in, I've been like, I am not in the mood for this. I don't really want to go outside. So I'm just going to sit in child's pose. And I sat in child's pose for like 25 minutes. It was amazing. I just got to relax. Some people don't like doing that because it makes them feel awkward and uncomfortable. But as a yoga teacher and a movement teacher, I prefer people to take agency on their own body and their own understanding and not worry about what I'm saying. All I'm going to say, if I see you like that, I'll come and say, "Are you all right?" And you go, "Yeah, I'm done. I need to relax." Sweet. Do your thing. I mean, that's far more important.
Yeah, that real relaxation that we're all really bad at.
Real relaxation.
I didn't even realise that relaxation was a thing. I thought reading a book's relaxation, but apparently it's not.
No, unfortunately, everyone thinks that they get home from work, have a stressful day, I just need to relax and sit in front of the TV. And then they just drive their nervous system like back through the roof of that. Even watching like Home and Away and Neighbours, and I don't know if they're even on TV anymore, but those kind of soaps, they're written and produced to be suspenseful, and it's all driving this I want to keep watching, which is essentially a fight and flight response. So it's not relaxing. So just some non-sleep deep rest kind of yoga nidra protocols, anything like that where you can just sit, close your eyes, put your headphones in and just relax. 25 minutes. Andrew Huberman said it, so I'm sure there's science behind it because he's like a Stanford professor. But they say that like an hour of yoga nidra is equivalent to 4 hours of sleep, because it should get you into your deep sleep patterns, this place where you're at your most relaxed. And so the idea being is you then be in that state for more time than you would if you had 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah, that's quite telling, isn't it? Well, I will put a link to your website with your membership details and everything. So if anybody is interested in joining you for any long COVID breath work or for anything else,
thank you,
then they can get in touch via that. And you've also mentioned your podcast a couple of times, and I'm a few episodes behind, but there's been a lot of really good people on there, some of whom you've mentioned today, like Patrick McKeown, and Perry Nicholson was on as well, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. There's also a woman called Emily Hightower. She was amazing, like lots about stress and our physiological responses to it. And then probably Brian McKenzie was one of the other ones talking about physiological stress and in and around breathing. Pretty much everyone on there, I would suggest, is well worth a listen for their own reasons. It's called Move, Breathe, Live. So the idea being is to help you move, breathe, and live a happier, healthier life. So hopefully everyone on there should bring something to it, but those people I would suggest are probably some of the most important.
I'll put the link to that in the notes as well. There's some really, really good ones on there. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really fun.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch and